Welcome to Roll Out the Scrolls, where we explore the Bible's timeless stories and teachings. Join us as we unpack biblical truths and discover how these ancient words can speak to us today, and let's roll. The past episode, we talked a little bit about eschatology. Now, eschatology was a big word that basically refers to the study of last things. So this would do with events that happened soon before the second coming of Jesus. So this episode, what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be looking at eschatology from the viewpoint of three different variations of Christianity. So in Christianity, we have three different subcategories that most Christians fit into. We have Catholicism, we have Orthodoxy, and then Protestantism. We're going to be viewing heaven, hell, and death through these three lenses today. Let's go ahead and get right into it with heaven. The view on eschatology, the study of the last things, those three topics are oftentimes major emphasis points, right? We have views on heaven, views on hell, and death. Within the framework of eschatology, the three different subcategories of heaven, hell, and death are very important conversations because this has to do with the here and after. It has to do with the state of the dead. It has to do with what happens after life here on earth. So let's go ahead and get into it. In heaven, what happens with these different views on the category of heaven? So Catholics, what do Catholics believe of the standard Catholic view of heaven? And again, there's going to always be exceptions to every rule. This is just what the official teachings of these different traditions teach. The Catholic view of heaven, their definition for heaven is a perfect life with the Trinity. They have an emphasis on relationship with God because God himself is relationship, as we mentioned in a previous episode here. Catholics believe that heaven is not necessarily a physical place that is within the visible universe, but they actually believe that it's more of a state of being rather than a location. They believe it's more important to have the feeling of heaven or have the nature of heaven without necessarily being in physical heaven. What do they believe about the body and soul when you go to heaven? They believe that humans experience temporal incorporeality. See, it's a big enough word that I even struggle with it. Temporal, meaning temporary, incorporeality, which means unable to inhabit a body. And so humans, according to the Catholic view, they experience the inability to take on a body for a temporary period of time. And they believe that happens before resurrection. So they believe that the body is separate from the soul, the immortal soul, before resurrection. They believe that at the end of time, that the body will resurrect and reunite with the immortal soul. They cite from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 16 through 18. Now, Catholics do not believe that we somehow become angels or that we have wings, but that they do believe that we do have immortal souls, meaning souls that are both sentient and souls that do not die. Within their framework of heaven, within their understanding of heaven, Catholics always embrace mystery. This is just at the foundation of Catholic faith, is that they embrace mystery. They acknowledge that certain depictions of heaven and of God, of the deity, that certain depictions are always going to be unsatisfactory when we talk about God. You're never going to be able to depict God in a way that completely, entirely depicts who he is. So they recognize that mystery has to be involved in the conversation when it comes to spiritual things, because according to Pope John Paul II, he says that it is always necessary to maintain a certain restraint in describing ultimate realities, since their depiction is always unsatisfactory. It's always important to do that. In kind of going along with this thought, they always they make an effort to avoid overly literal interpretations of the New Jerusalem, for example, when it comes to heaven. They take into consideration the verse, no eye has seen and no ear has heard or entered into the heart of man what God has prepared, right? So they take that very literally, knowing that these ultimate realities, although we have a small snippet of them, a small snapshot, we don't have the full picture. So it's important to be conservative in our interpretations of New Jerusalem or heaven imagery. They do believe that when we are in heaven, that we retain our individuality. We retain our personal identity in heaven. We don't become someone that we were not on earth. But they believe that there will not be pain, there will not be sorrow, while having that personal identity that is similar to what was on earth. Here it is more beautiful because there is not pain, there is not sorrow. And what's interesting is that they believe that they will be aware of their lost ones that are not saved and about the suffering that they're going through. But they do not believe that they're going to have pain or sorrow, even without awareness that some might not be saved. So recapping their view on time and eternity, they believe that God exists outside of time, and they believe that the saved will also exist without time as well, or outside of time as well. We also know a lot of people have heard of purgatory being a state of being for those who have a Catholic view. They have this view called aveternity, and aveternity describes the intermediate state, so between state, right, between heaven and between hell, for souls that exist within purgatory. So that's the Catholic view, and this is again a very snapshot type of view. There are exceptions to these rules. So going on to Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy, there are some similarities between Orthodoxy and Catholicism, and we're going to be hearing about that as we discuss it. What do they view as the nature of heaven and hell? And heaven and hell are kind of described together a lot of times because it is the reality of a soul after death. And so they are both states of being, or they're both physical places, depending on the worldview or the tradition. Within Orthodoxy, they also believe that heaven and hell is more of a state of being than a physical place. Unlike Catholicism, though, they believe that it is basically strictly a state of being and not a physical place. They believe that heaven or hell occur when we encounter Jesus or God, who is the consuming fire, the energy, so to speak, of God's love. So the idea that when we encounter Christ while being saved, we'll encounter him as a warmth and as a light. But if we approach him as lost, that we will see him as a consuming fire, as pain and separation from him, which that warmth and light would be represented by heaven, and then that pain and separation would ultimately represent hell. So they see it based on our relation to God in a relational type of way, that our experience depends on our relationship with him. They believe that the kingdom of heaven is not a destination, but a person, and that person is Christ himself. They have this quote that says, "We journey in the kingdom, not to the kingdom." So they don't have so much a focus on escapism or of leaving this earth, but they have the focus on bringing Christ to earth and of bringing his kingdom to earth. When it comes to the topic of hell, they don't again believe that there's a material fire or some type of external punishment, but that they believe that hell instead is more of a state of inner darkness caused because of our separation from God. So again, it's very relational. It goes back to how are we relating to God. It talks about the idea that God's presence remains everywhere. It even remains in hell. They use Psalms 139 as an example. "Where could I flee from your presence? If I ascend into heaven, you are there. If I sink into the depths, you are there," right? So within Orthodoxy, they believe that God's presence remains everywhere, even in hell, but that it's not perceived the same way by everyone. Now, their perspective on free will is that every human gets to decide how to respond to God's love. It's very focused on free will. Free will is an emphasis within this framework here. A quote that kind of sums up Orthodoxy is, "Neither heaven nor hell are created places. In the end, we will all experience the presence of God. Whether or not we enjoy that presence depends on the condition of our hearts." So these are kind of some ideas of what people might think of when they say the word heaven. It's important for us to know what framework they're working with when they say these terms, because someone who is Catholic might not be referring to the same type of heaven as a Protestant or as an Orthodox member. So it's important for us to understand terms and how they're used within different traditions, so we're using the same semantics and terminology here. Now let's briefly talk about the Protestant view of heaven and hell. The Protestant view oftentimes is very varied. It has a lot of diversity within Protestantism. You have many different types of Protestants, so there's going to be a lot of diversity reflected within those views. But the Protestant view oftentimes sees life as a journey. It's a pilgrimage, right, toward an eternal destination, and that destination is either heaven or hell. This journey, it shapes both the present life and the eternal outcome. So it is both for spiritual formation in the here and now, and also our spiritual destiny in heaven or hell. So it's a journey. One key aspect of Protestantism is that purgatory, the belief of purgatory, is rejected. resurrected, it's not seen as a biblical viewpoint or a biblical doctrine. They also believe that the final judgment day will include the resurrection of the dead and the separation of the righteous and the unrighteous. There's a parable in Matthew 25 where the sheep are divided from the goats. The sheep representing those who are saved, the goats representing those who are not. And so they believe that there's going to be that separation between those who are saved and those who are not saved at the end. Their interpretations of heaven and hell, again, are very varied because there is a lot of diversity within this group. But some hold traditional literal views that heaven is paradise, hell is eternal punishment. So others might interpret these concepts closer to an Orthodox type view, where these concepts are more metaphors than anything else. They're not necessarily destinations, but they're realities and relationship realities. Again, there is this growing theological diversity that some Protestants question eternal conscious torment. They wonder, okay, is the soul actually conscious when it's in hell? Is it consciously and permanently and consistently being tormented? Because this is oftentimes a stressor for people when they consider God's justice and mercy. How can a God of love torment someone in hell forever? And that's a question that some traditions within Protestantism have addressed and brought up. So then we have the view of death. We look at the Catholic view on death. They believe in something called the particular judgment. And the particular judgment, they believe, occurs immediately after death. They believe that the soul is judged based on its relationship with God, not based on its good deeds or bad deeds, but based on its relationship with God. So there's 3 different possible outcomes of that particular judgment. So the different places or realities where a soul will be spending its eternity or destiny. Those are, of course, heaven, purgatory, and hell. Heaven is for souls who die in God's grace and who are fully purified. There's this idea of purification or sanctification before heaven. And purgatory is reserved for souls who are in God's grace, but that they're still in need of purification before heaven. They're not fully clean. They're not fully pure or perfect before heaven. And then hell is for those who die in mortal sin and who reject God's love and reject God's grace. So then they also, again, we mentioned this before, but they also do believe in the resurrection of the body, but that occurs at the final judgment, the last judgment, when all the bodies are resurrected and reunited with their conscious souls. If we look at the Orthodox view, the Orthodox tradition view on death, they see death as a transition. They see it as the separation of the soul from the body, so very similar to Catholicism. But they also believe that it's a temporary condition until the final resurrection. So there is that separation. They do believe that separation, but that separation will not be for all eternity. It's only going to happen until the final resurrection. They believe that soul remains conscious and that it experiences almost like a foretaste of either heaven or hell in that separation. And then we have the particular judgment, again, within the Orthodox view. This is a very, it goes almost hand in hand with the Catholic view here. They believe that it occurs immediately after death, right? And it reveals where the soul is spiritually, but it doesn't reveal where the soul is going to be finally within the final judgment. They believe that there is a tradition called the toll houses, and this describes the soul's purification and encounter with its sins before entering its rest. So again, there's a focus on purification, just like in Catholicism, this purification before being glorified or being translated into heaven. Orthodox members also believe in prayers for the dead. The church prays for those who are departed. They pray for the dead. They believe that these prayers can bring comfort and aid. And they also believe that God's mercy continues beyond death, so that those prayers are actually emphasizing or changing the destiny of those souls. There is, within Orthodoxy, there is the concept of final resurrection. They believe that the body and soul will reunite at the second coming of Christ, and that all will stand before the final judgment and experience God's eternal presence. They will either experience it as joy or they will experience it as torment, and depending on where they are spiritually. We mentioned that before of the reality of heaven and hell. So that would be the reality of heaven or hell right there. What they're finally seeing God as. How are they experiencing God's presence? As we wrap up here, we're talking about the Protestant view now, the Protestant view of death
and the soul. The Protestant view here holds that the soul either goes immediately to heaven or hell after death, and depending on, of course, the denomination, believes that the soul, that is immortal soul, goes directly to heaven or hell after death. Some denominations and traditions within Protestantism believe in a concept called soul sleep, and this is basically where the dead don't know anything. They take this from Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 5, and they believe that the dead are resting, but they're resting unconsciously. There's not a conscious aspect in death, and they believe that that happens until the resurrection, where the body and the breath and everything that made the person is resurrected together in the resurrection. So this you will see in some Anabaptist traditions, and also within Adventist traditions, and some fringe groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses also believe in this view. The views on judgment when it comes to Protestantism is that they believe in two different stages of judgment, typically, depending again on denomination, but you're going to believe in typically two or more stages of judgment. The first stage is going to be the particular judgment. We've mentioned this as in the Catholicism tradition and also Orthodoxy, but particular in judgment is immediate assignment to heaven or hell. Basically, if someone dies, they're immediately going to be assigned, okay, you are going to heaven or you're going to hell. And then we have the final judgment, which occurs at the end of time when Jesus comes back, and that confirms whatever assignment they had been before. So whether you are going to heaven, whether you're going to go to hell, and at that time the body is resurrected and joins the soul in whatever area that they were. And that, again, that's not for every single denomination. They're not always going to believe that, but those are two aspects or two variations that you will see within Protestantism. So there's some diversity and variations when it comes to the afterlife within Protestantism. Evangelicals, for example, they emphasize that personal salvation through faith alone in Christ alone. They see heaven as the eternal communion with God and hell as separation. Again, there's some Orthodoxy tradition kind of in that as well. So there's elements that are always overlap within every single tradition here, as we were mentioning. But mainline Protestants, not evangelicals, they'll interpret heaven and hell symbolically a lot of times as the soul's relational stance toward God rather than a physical destination. So there's a lot of Orthodoxy and Catholicism views within Protestantism as well, within a lot of these traditions. So again, this is kind of just an overview of different views on heaven, hell, and death when it comes to our different subcategories within Christianity, which is our Catholic brothers and sisters, our Orthodox brothers and sisters, and our Protestant brothers and sisters. So it's important for us to understand these terms and how they're understood by different people, so we know what we're talking about when we mention heaven, or we mention hell, or we mention the soul, we mention the body, resurrection. All those different words mean different things to different groups. So it's important for us to be on the same page when we communicate these important truths.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Roll Out the Scrolls. Make sure to share and follow if you enjoyed this episode. Keep asking questions, seeking answers, and you'll find us here again, ready to roll out those scrolls.